So, welcome to They Think It's All Sober, the legendary Mr. Ollie Eats.
Woo, woo, woo. Hello, how we doing?
Very well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, honoured to be on.
Thank you very much. Also, a slight fraudulent you asking me how I am because we got the training together.
We did, yeah. We had a good old catch up on the way.
But it'll
over.
sound good on air.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, how do you guys know each other then? So you got the training.
I'll let Ollie take this one.
Well, it goes back in the day, really. We're
beyond the
local
day.
lads.
The
from
decade.
High Wycombe town.
Wycombe boys.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Nice.
many of our boozy night in the Antelope. Many a gigs in the White Horse
Yeah.
and Phoenix Bar. And
Yeah.
it was fun times.
It's interesting, though. I was thinking about this on the way in. Yesterday. It's like we know each other, and I would class you a friend, but our groups were separate.
Yes.
So it was odd. There was like these two kind of groups in Wycombe. I think are the ones that kind of grew up locally, and then people that came in from uni. And then there was like this middle group, and I was kind of towards the uni group. You were with like the local lot.
Yeah.
So we'd see each other like every Friday and Saturday at the Lope and have this like chaos, but then no one would ever speak from the different groups
Right,
outside of
interesting.
it.
And then our friends groups like crossed over, didn't they? And that's
Yeah.
how it sort of like all linked in. And yeah.
And now
so-
it's really incestuous.
Yes.
Some are married.
Yeah.
Are they? I just made that up.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Some
I think
have
that's,
kids.
you know, the local lads. You keep local, don't you? So, yeah.
Exactly.
So the White Horse in High Wycombe was notorious for being a place where you could go and watch a gig and then turn into a strip bar, right?
Well, yeah, and also the other way around. So you could actually get a dance before
Yeah.
going to a
Okay.
gig.
Yeah.
But it was also allowing under 18s in. So it was a under 18 venue as well.
Sounds very chaotic.
It was lots of wristbands, but also like that place was. It encouraged underage drinking. So like if you didn't have a drink, the bouncer would kick you out. Like it was very bizarre.
Yeah, I remember going there, and it would be like you'd load in, because I'd play gigs there. You'd load in at like 5, and then you'd get in there as like a 16-year-old and peer through the window, and there'd be like someone doing disgusting things to themselves. Well, not disgusting things. Everyone's allowed to masturbate, but on a stage in front of all these old men, and there'd be someone walking around with a pint glass. And then everyone in there had to put a pound in. And then the dancer would go upstairs, they'd open the door, we'd load onto the same stage, set our gear up, and then play a gig.
Mate, that's so
It was
such
so
a bizarre
fucked
setup,
up.
isn't it?
And then they'd be like, "Oh, boys, the dressing rooms are upstairs." And you'd walk upstairs, and like Anastasia would just be like putting her clothes on. She'd be like, "Oh, hello guys, welcome." It's like, it was a real, I guess, a real in what's the word I'm looking for? Like introduction, I guess, to
Yeah,
the
that
world.
will do it. There was also a venue called the Roundabout.
Yes, there was, which is now called.
Was that the Phoenix?
That
bar?
is Phoenix,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or now it's called something else, I think. Or
I
is it
don't-
Yeah, basically opposite the bus station.
Yeah.
There was a car park back in the day
Yeah.
before Eden's. Then it was. God, we're going reminiscing
Yeah,
on
we
old
are. But it
Wycombe
was
days.
mad though, because that scene, and I think where Ollie and I grew up, like we saw so many big bands even before I started working in music.
Yeah.
And Biffy Clyro played the White Horse, Muse played the White Horse, Coldplay played the
Sick.
White Horse, the band who shan't be named from West Wales played the White Horse. Like all these huge bands played the White Horse. It was like, yeah.
Yeah, it was almost like the equivalent venue, I suppose, in Wycombe to what the boxing club was like in Reading, or
Yeah.
the Face Bar. And
Oh,
it
Face
had
Bar,
these
yeah.
like bands that went on to do like huge things, just going through these like shithole venues. But
And it was
you know.
small. I went there last year actually. And,
Did you now?
Yeah, in the evening to watch a band. Another local band actually. And yeah, I forgot how small it is. And yeah, we were pitting away like we were. And
Was that This Dying Hour?
it was this time now.
Amazing.
yes.
And for context for anyone listening, This Dying Hour was the band that my dear friend Sean was in. So that's probably the link of Wycombe as well, isn't it? Like the music scene, and then our friendship groups, and then Sean kind of
And
above it all.
It was a really, really nice event. You know, it was all the parents were there as well, and
Amazing.
we definitely gave him a good old send off. One of my mates was pitting so hard that he actually gave himself whiplash, as in like, had to go to the doctors.
We're so
for
old.
it. And there was only 6 of us, you know, like on that dance floor. But yeah, it was a great event, great band, and good memories.
Amazing.
Nice.
Well, should we dive into?
Yeah, I guess so. So, you know, I think, like with all our guests, we try and get a bit of the backstory of drinking, relationship with drink growing up, and, you know, I guess leading into a more present day to the point of sobriety. So let's do it. So, Jamie, your time machine, please.
Do you? They're getting better. By
I
the
was
week.
waiting to hear that noise
In live, in the flesh.
in person.
So
Someone said it was shit last week.
you did, but then they
She
retracted.
sat opposite me and was like, "That was terrible." And like, really hurt.
Then retracted it actually
So she
after the
should.
explanation.
Thanks,
but,
Abby.
I think it's good.
I like the noise. I like
Thanks,
it.
Ollie.
So yeah, childhood, Ollie. Like, what sort of part did alcohol have to play when you growing up?
Yeah, I had a very boozy childhood. Not like me personally consuming it, but my family. So especially my dad's side of the family.
Right.
My grandparents. Back in the day, they loved being down the social club, loved being in the pubs. I used to think it was really cool that my granddad had like his own stall in like 3 different places, and now like on reflection, that's just because he drank so much in those places. Even if he wasn't there, no one sat in that stall, and that sort of rubbed off on my dad as well. And I spent my childhood in these places as well. I was that kid in the corner, can of Coke, packet of crisps. But it was fond memories, Like, yes, it was a very boozy childhood, but in positive way. So it was because all my friends were down there as well. Being a local lad and my family being local, all of their friends were down and their kids were down. So, most of the summer was spent in those dodgy like tree houses in the back of pubs, or on a really poorly designed slide that had those angles and stuff like that.
And nails sticking out.
Oh yeah, health and safety, like it was insane. So yeah, it was. My dad was a heavy drinker, but again, I never saw any negative sides of that either. Like he was even into he used to build these like wooden ships at home, like really intricate, take months to build. But he would do it like after like 8 cans of Stella, and he'd be like weaving like these like massive sails and stuff like that, like absolutely pissed, but like still being able to sort of function. And never saw him drunk at all. I think that did have a degree of like the whole like patriarchal setup back in the day, where like you're at a pub with your family, and then the mums take the kids home, and the dads carry on drinking and stuff like that, but never even hungover. He was tired and grumpy, but all parents are tired and grumpy, and that probably was a hangover, but I didn't really see it that much. So yeah, sort of childhood was spent like that, but it did probably glamorize alcohol for me, or at least see it as the association with community, socializing, all of those types of things. And it made me want to drink, even at young. It was always like asking for a beer, even though I was hideously underage, or I remember like I really loved getting a shandy from the chip shop, like in the cans, and thinking it was a beer and eating it with my Savoy and stuff like that. And that's what I did play in. And but no real problems. I did get into alcohol at a young age, so I weirdly hit puberty young, so like at like 11, 12. So I went into like secondary school with a full beard. And,
no way.
Yeah. Honestly, very, very bizarre. I remember actually being in preschool and having hairy armpits, and everyone going, "What the hell's that?"
That is very young, because I think I was like 16 before
I don't think I've hit it yet. This is fake.
So yeah, and I probably rode the last few years of like, if you looked old enough, you kind of got served. So going into sort of like my sort of like earlier teen years. I wasn't into sports at all, but I was into skateboarding. Like skateboarding was my life. Like it was, I'd wake up, I'd watch like Osiris the Storm on VHS. Like that was like the best skate video ever. I picked up my Walkman, my backpack, my skateboard, and I was out. But like, I actually remember, because I was, reflecting on alcohol, coming onto here, that I remember the first time that alcohol actually changed the narrative of my sort of decision making was, I was in Wickham. I was at Scorpion Records. Do you remember Scorpion Records?
Scorpion Records, yeah.
I was buying like Slipknot albums and drum and bass tape packs. Like the ones with like the weird graphics.
Yeah, with like Adam F.
It was like Slam and Vinyl, Hastings Pier 98. That sort of stuff. And I was with a friend, and we walked out and we bumped into his brother. And his brother was like, "Oh, I'm gonna, there's a shop opposite that, definitely you can buy alcohol underage. Like, do you want to come and get drunk?" And my friend was like, "No, I'm not going to." And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And that was my introduction into, White Lightning and Mad Dog 2020, and down the Rye. And that's probably, how old are you, Jamie?
I'm 35.
Yeah, so I'm 36. So that's probably where our sort of social group started crossing over, hanging out down the Rye.
It was interesting, actually, because I think we were talking about this with another guest, but Wickham in particular in that area, I don't know whether it was like we were close enough to London, but a lot of people's parents didn't want them to go in on their own. But also there was enough going on that there was things going on. Because we talk a lot of the time sometimes about like small town drinking. Wickham isn't a small town, but there was just this group of like, I'd honestly say about 100 kids our age, maybe even 200 with the gigs, that were just this unit. But everyone got so fucked up all the time. It was mad.
Yeah, I think as well, looking at sort of the cultural sort of sides around then, it was when you're a grunger or you're a chav. And there was definitely a split, even down to the point of like territorial or violence, like if you wore skate trainers and baggy jeans, you could get beaten up, which is mad thinking about now how it's all sort of embedded in. And so you clubbed together, you had your spots that you hung out with, and there's areas you didn't go. And, there was remember the metal underage event that was happening in Wickham?
I do. Where was that at? Town Hall?
I think that was a town hall.
Yeah.
But that was like a beacon to go and get beaten up at. Like,
literally. Go to that. There'd be I remember running my gigs in Amersham, and I was 17, and I had to call the police because chavs had come down with, I say chavs nowadays, it's so funny, but with needles with bleach in them, and they were trying to run around and like stab grungers. It was so territorial. But then I was also dealing with like 15-year-olds in the woods who'd like got really hammered before the show, and I had to like turn them away. I forgot how territorial that was actually.
I think that was everywhere though, wasn't it? We had the same thing in Reading with like the Face Bar. It was on like the cusp of town where, a load of grungers turned up, but then there would also be like a pool bar above the Face Bar, and then it would just be like brawling
Let's
every
just arm
Friday.
these
Saturday
men
night.
with weapons.
yeah.
See him out the windows, like he's got dreadlocks. Get him.
but it was a sense of identity, wasn't it? The alternate scene. And I think,
Yeah.
like I spent a lot of time in Reading as well. Is it the Purple Turtle? Is that
For
still
sure.
going?
Yeah, still going
Is it
strong.
still going?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And that was that identity. But I think it was very drug and drink fueled. I don't know if that's a common link between alternate culture and substance abuse, but like, I definitely found that, but I actually, just going back one bit, like I smoked before I drunk, and that was, you smoked before you drunk.
Yeah, I was more into weed for sure than booze. Yeah.
I was the first in my year to smoke weed, and everyone thought it was the worst thing ever. It was like, I was going to be a drug addict and stuff like that. And I think that was from the skate thing. You hung out with older people being in the skate scene. But it weren't for me. I got over that very, very quickly, and found drinking high percentage cider being my weapon of choice. So that was on my teens, and it did on reflection did really change the narrative. I stopped skateboarding. I still had my skateboard, but my life now was gigs, alcohol, smoking cigarettes, women. That what it became. And it did sort of take that innocence away from my teens. Again, because I looked older, I also started work. I didn't like school. I didn't like school at all, but I did like working. So I had 3 jobs when I was like 15, 16.
No way.
I was making quite a lot of money, because back in the day you didn't have like phone contracts, and so I worked at a dry ski slope, maintaining snowboards.
Burnt down.
Yeah, burnt down. Yeah.
R.I.P.
So I probably was on like 650 quid a month at 15, 16, which is huge disposable income.
Yeah.
And that was just spent on, getting wrecked, which is really, really bad.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, because I suppose at the age there, I guess 20 years ago, 650 quid a month, probably a big sum of money.
Yeah, you didn't have the outgoings that you have nowadays.
And
speak to teenagers now.
What, 4 quid back then?
Oh yeah,
350, 4 quid.
Yeah. And again, like hanging out at the work related places, you have older people. So I sort of then started like unfortunately like shunning my school friends and hanging out with older people because they had cars and they went places and done interesting things. But again, that was a lot around alcohol. So I probably got into the pub scene in my mid-teens. I dated older girls. Annoyingly, then the Challenge 21 thing came in when I was like 17. And it was really awkward because at 16, I could go everywhere. And then I couldn't go anywhere. And having an older girlfriend, I think we ended up breaking up for that. Because then I couldn't get in anywhere.
Mate, it's funny you say that because I remember having my 18th birthday twice. Because I drank in the same pub for years and years and years. And then when I was... Like, I obviously then that challenge thing came in. So then they were like, hang on, didn't you celebrate your 18th? I was like, shh. There's my ID.
Well, you were born in 88, right?
I was.
And were you
87.
87. So I remember with 88, there was a thing you could do on your driving license with a tiny bit of Tipex and a pen and a scalpel, and you could change the 8 into a 6.
Ah.
And so that was me, because my birthday was July. All of my mates were like 18 before, and then someone had like figured out how to do this, and it honestly you look at it and it was perfect. And you had to do it to 2 numbers, because I remember getting rumbled once.
I love that we're now just fraudulent advice here on this podcast.
I fraudulently made my way in, and it was. But because obviously it would rub off. But like every time I went out, I was like, right, get the little Tipex out, the pen, the scalpel, dinner, and then you're out. But yeah, it was. That was my. Don't prosecute me, anyone.
It was wild times because it used to be like trendy to buy fake IDs. Like you could, in back of magazines, you could order them and stuff like that. And I think there's that point, wasn't it, where bouncers just needed to, a bit lip service, wasn't it? It was like, they're going to ask you for ID. As long as you show some sort of card with a date on it, you're going to get in.
Yeah.
Women's Institute membership. They're like, yeah, no worries. Can you come?
McLovin.
Deary me.
Love it.
So yeah, so from working, I left school at 16. Went straight into my career that I had for 18 years, which was a hairdresser.
Right.
I completely forgot.
Yeah.
That's how I knew you. Ollie the hairdresser.
Yeah, I was the hairdresser.
Yeah.
So what that meant was that I didn't have the summer holidays, went straight into work, and I moved out at 18 and got myself my first flat in Wickham Centre, or just up the road actually, but about 10 minutes walk. And that meant I was pretty much, very similar to Jamie, like the only person that had a house.
Yeah.
I think there was times I remember hearing that you had a house and I had the house.
Yeah, we were the two people in Wickham with houses.
You know, so I had absolutely no money with the rent. Moved in with my best mate, and like we lost our landlady stupidly told us that we lost our deposit on the first day of moving in. So I accidentally stood in motor oil and walked in on the white carpet, and then she went, "Well, you've just lost your deposit."
No.
But that just meant then I was like, "Well, I'm not going to get any money back, and they can't take any money."
So I can fuck this place
Yeah,
up.
and like, I'd say one of the biggest guilts in life was me being the most horrendous neighbour ever. Because at the time, I can't remember, it was just after a recession, so I set up a PA hire company called Party Seekers, and it was cost-effective alternative to DJs. Because back in the day, that's what you done. If you had a party, you got a DJ, didn't you? It was like 250 quid, and I'd come in and set these setups when you had your iPod. Can't see my age now, you know. Like, and so I had all this equipment. So every weekend, I just turned my flat into a rave, like
Oh my God.
full-on PA systems, full disco lights, smoke machine.
Sounds like my lockdown, which is embarrassing because that was a couple of years ago.
So yeah, but I think from hairdressing, like hairdressing was an industry that you couldn't really have a hangover. It's so close service, you would stink and people would know it. You have to be creative. You have to be energetic. So for me, it just, you know, I didn't even think about drinking in a week. It was, I worked really, really hard in a week, and then I just got absolutely obliterated on a Saturday night. I worked evenings, I worked weekends. It didn't really happen. But yeah, I would drink, and I would drink heavy. Like my pre-drink was like a bottle of vodka with my mate, and that was before I'd go out.
Yeah.
And then we'd go down to the Antelope, and it's famous, they served like quad vods.
Yeah, I think I spoke about those, didn't I? The quad vods. And there was a time when they had a deal on, I think it was before Monster was a big brand, and it was I remember them in like pint bottles of Monster, and it was a quad vod and Monster for £2.50.
Yeah. It was mad.
Basically like liquid speed.
So I've always been in it for the fun time, not a long time. So for my drinking habit was to drink as much as humanly possible and get absolutely wrecked. I wasn't trying to stay out to the early hours or anything like that. It was utter annihilation, and I loved every minute of it. Like I was known as the happy drunk. I never had drama. I never caused anything. I never got upset. I just always got too wrecked and always had to be taken home early. That was the only thing.
Charlie or Dennis's?
Oh, Charlie.
I'm Dennis, man.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I need to go back because obviously, like now I do kebab reviews.
Yeah.
And the most famous would be standing in the middle and having I think there is an old school YouTube video of someone actually doing it.
Is
like,
there?
Way back when.
No.
We should probably just explain this for you, Tom.
Oh yeah, sorry. We're talking.
So when you come out the Antelope, there's the Weatherspoons on one side of the square, the Antelope on the other side of the square, and then two kebab vans, Charlie and Dennis.
Nice.
And it was just, you had a side, and I've never deviated from that side, even to this day. If I'm like late at night coming back from somewhere and I wanted food, I still would never go to Charlie.
Yeah, it was, and it was an absolute battle. But yeah, I think I'm going to reenact that video of doing those reviews. So yeah, so that's sort of like that continued into sort of like my mid-20s, just partying every weekend, not drinking in a week. And then, fast forward a little bit, mid-20s happen. We all get canned by our girlfriends at the time because I think like they're contemplating where they're at their life, settling down. We're still playing Call of Duty till 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm now on my own in another place. And it's where drinking in a week starts happening because, I start dating, you have to go out. Beforehand, it was you go to a party and you hook up and you're with that person for a couple of months. And now all of a sudden I'm out in a week and going to restaurants and bars and stuff.
Gotcha.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like alcohol is just a default, isn't it? What do you do? Let's go for a drink.
Yeah.
And it's so embedded into our lives that that's just what you decide to do.
Yeah.
I think it's changed a little bit now. Like I think like I've been with my wife for years now, but like, you go for coffee, you know, much more civilized.
Dating sober's scary though. Like obviously for me, coming out of a relationship, you know, 6 months ago, dating for the first time sober or meeting someone for the first time sober was difficult. Like, because it was like, oh, okay, I'd always just had that alcohol as a default, and not like get hammered, but it would be that commonality of like, we'll go for a couple of drinks, hang out, we might not get along, whatever. Now it's like, okay, cool. And ironically, the first person I met sober turned out to be sober and incredible, and that was quite easy. But yeah, for some people, I can imagine that's quite a scary premise.
Yeah, I think as well, like, what changed my dynamic as well was craft beer. Now, I'm not blaming craft beer industry for any of my, alcoholic demise. But what it was that beforehand, I just associated beer as one taste, lager, and you go to a pub and you drink it, or you drink it, and then all of a sudden you've got these like raspberry double IPA hoppy things you have to order online, and they're really expensive, but it's a cool thing. So this was the first time I had alcohol in my fridge that wasn't just to get drunk at the weekends. So now that's when I started drinking maybe 3 or 4 times a week. But when you do that over a decade, that's quite a lot of alcohol,
Yeah.
But that's seen as normal, if anything, quite low, It was just only a few beers. And I think that's where I started realising that, you start these patterns form and these habits form, and, fall into that very stereotypical, like, you've had a bad day, you'll have a beer, good day, beer, halfway through the week, beer. And, that's where I think the sort of that habit of drinking really started to manifest in my life. And probably the first time as well that I think in mid-20s, where you're still really pining for those weekends, those big boozy weekends, but they got a bit boring. You've been doing it for nearly a decade now, and it was the first time that happy-go-lucky guy was kind of dwindling. I wasn't enjoying those big nights out. I was still getting as drunk. The hangovers were infinitely worse, and I think like of a bad breakup as well, maybe some psychological scarring in that. My relationship was slowly changing with alcohol. It wasn't associated with happiness as I've known it in my early 20s. So yeah, that was my...
Was it, so were you still hairdressing at this point?
Yeah, hairdressing.
And I suppose like the midweek drinking, did you have like a relative sort of cap on it? Was it like, I've got work tomorrow, so I'm just going to have like 3 or 4? Or did it start to kind of creep up and up? Or
at that stage in like sort of like my mid-20s, it was capped. Like, I have always struggled with hangovers,
right?
Even as a teenager. So I know, and beer in particular. I don't know if you guys, I had my safe drinks that didn't give you hangovers, and drinks that really gave you hangovers. And beer, even though I like the taste of it, was one of those. If I drank 4 pints, I'd definitely feel it in the morning. So that sort of kept me capped. And at the time, I loved my industry. I was doing really, really well. I was a director. It was all going well. I was doing competition. So I was really like focused in it, and I didn't really want to mess that up. Even though like, actually like substance abuse in that hair industry is actually rife.
Yeah.
Because of the hours that people are working. It's a cool, fast-paced industry. A lot of people migrate to say like London and stuff like that. They're on poor wages. They club together. They have fun. So, but for me, it was I was just in a nice town salon. I was that local lad. I worked, and there wasn't any sort of like problems that arose yet. But it was then when I started settling down. That's where alcohol really started taking a negative effect on me.
Sure. Yeah, because I can imagine, like you say, like you don't want to be waking up, going into someone's hair, and you're like, oh shit, I feel a bit like,
I've had haircuts before where I'm like can smell like if someone's had a big night, because they are in your like close
that's
vicinity.
What I mean.
Just FYI, that's not at you, Luke. If you're listening, you're a great hairdresser and you've never been hungover. So I'm not digging my current hairdresser out there, but you can tell in that vicinity when someone has been on a mad one.
Yeah,
that's interesting. So like, I guess you're sort of mid-20s at this point when that's there, and like talk us through then when. So we always talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. It's like a real like staple narrative in the majority of like people's drinking experiences. So. And we've all had fun when we were younger and done the sort of like the white lightning, the childhood drinking, the gigs, and it is all like a bit of a laugh. And even the hangovers are kind of fun at that point. You're like, oh, I feel a bit shit, but let's meet up down the local and maybe like, have a fry up, hair of the dog at the pub, lunch or whatever, and then go again. But I suppose, mid-20s, your hangovers are getting worse. You kind of get midweek drinking starts to become more prevalent. When did you kind of think, shit, maybe this is like getting a bit much? You're like, taking a darker turn.
It was actually when I had children.
Right.
You know, it was up to that point, it was your stereotypical, you know, yeah, your social life sort of like fades out a little bit, but you know, it was a dynamic change. So with, you know, when because you've got children as well. Haven't you?
Yeah, I've got a little boy. Yeah.
So what I found was that, you know, before you have children, especially the dynamic with your partner, you know, all the attention's on each other, and it's you know, it's great. And then you know, a human comes along, and you're responsible for that upbringing and care and attention, and it completely changes the dynamic. And for me, it really affected me. And for me, it was actually around the same time as my first daughter was born, was the birth of Ollie Eats.
Right.
And I think for me, what I found was I got that solace and I got that attention from a social media account.
Right.
And you know, because you know, we talk about addiction. One of the biggest addictions is dopamine. Like dopamine for me, and something I'm still very much addicted to. And you know, those likes and those follows and stuff like that sort of like replaced the dynamic shift that I had with my partner, and the new sort of like way of life that I was handling it. And you know, circling back to sort of like the craft beer thing. I do like beer, don't worry. But it's you know, so what you find with social, so I'm a food blogger, for anyone who doesn't know, you know, you look at your insights data and you find out what people like. And what I was finding that people like the naughtier food, and they also liked me showcasing alcohol. So then I was like, okay, cool, well, I need to showcase more. So I brought more, I drank more, and alcohol got seriously embedded into my content.
Right.
You know, and with that in mind, it's just, you naturally, it's like, you know, burning a hole in my pocket or burning a hole in the fridge, you know, you end up just drinking it rather than having the odd one.
Yeah.
It then definitely increased. And that's when I introduced wine into my life. And wine is my kryptonite. So wine for me, because you think like craft beer's got a story, wine, the story of wine. Like,
yeah.
I've got it tattooed on me. I've got qualifications in it. Like,
wow.
I just found it fascinating and very Moorish.
Yeah.
So, for me, it made amazing content, and wine naturally is associated with food. You pair it, you know, it just sat so native, but also it's a lot more higher ABV. And this is where now, you know, I'm drinking those beers, but they're like the starters, and now I'm introducing wine into my life. And I'm at this point, you know, I'm now drinking 7 days a week.
Yeah.
You know, I might not be getting drunk at the weekend as much, or not having those crazy. They've maybe once a month now. You know, when you get the green pass that you can go out with your friends and get drunk. But then look at the alcohol content. You know, the amount I'm drinking per week has dramatically increased. You know, and then the rubbish food that I'm eating, because that's what people want to see online. And you know, it was definitely that. And I think the reasons I was drinking was changing. You know, again, creating content rather than enjoying it and wanting it. You know,
I was going to say, like, what was the dynamics? I'm assuming at that point you weren't doing enough for it to be a full-time job. So were you still working with a young kid at home and a wife, and then making the content at home, and then drink? Like, that feels like a lot to be juggling.
Hugely, yeah. You know, like at the time, that was a good few years ago. It was, you know, what is an influencer? You know, at the time it was people who took selfies, and I'm doing food content, and it's gaining momentum, but I'm not making any money from it yet, and I'm still hairdressing. I've got young kids, you know, but I'm liking this growth, and I'm liking this attention I'm getting online, and it's really like ripping me in so many different directions. And you know, when I started then monetizing it, then I was like, well, I need to put a bit more effort into this. And you know, my wife's, you know, she's my anchor, she's my ground. You know, she grounds me. You know, she is quite advocate against social media. She's much more about, you know, in real life. So, you know, and she said, like, look, if you want to do this, you need to monetize it, and you need to make something, because you're spending a load of money on this content, a lot of attention away from the children, and attention away from me. So I did, again, because I've got this like work ethic and this determination, and I did, and I turned it into, you know, an account, and eventually I managed to leave hairdressing. But the year, you know, again, for being the sole breadwinner in the house, and being, you know, it was a time that it was most stressful, was the year before I quit hairdressing.
Right.
For me, it was Ollie Eats was at scale. It was monetized. I was the busiest, and it was just after COVID, so everyone come back to getting their hair done properly. I had 2 kids at that point, And it was the first time I started having like sort of like panic attacks, breakdowns, just because the scale of I was operating at, like my mind just could not.
Live an overload.
Oh, hugely. And that's when I was falling out of love with hairdressing.
Right.
Amazing in industry, but there's big flaws in it. You know, come the workload, the money, all those things. And I think, you know, when you have kids, you reach your sort of by that point, you know, I'm sort of coming into my mid-30s, you start evaluating your life. And for me, hairdressing, I'd hit the ceiling. If the only way for me to progress was either to open up my own salon or to work more hours.
Yep.
Which I didn't want to do. You know, I want, if anything, when you get older, you want to start cutting down on the hours, not increasing. But it's also a creative industry, and if you fall out of love with it, it's very hard to do. Yeah. Because it's hard. And I was in a very prestigious salon with very prestigious clients that demanded a lot of attention, and rightly so, for the prices I was charging. And I just wanted, you know, like the clients were getting annoyed because all I wanted to talk about was social media, and food and wine and things like that. And food and wine is a fantastic subject matter to talk about, but not all the time.
Sure.
And my clients were slowly noticing where my attention and my passion was really laying. And then I was like losing clients, and it was just, it was not going the right way. And eventually the maths worked out and the finances worked out, and I got to quit hairdressing.
Yeah. That's great, man. That's really it's a great place to be, isn't it? When you go, you notice your passion kind of moving somewhere else and you want to go there.
Yep.
You know, I suppose I kind of had it when on the kind of brink of music, being able to make me enough money to not have to, because I was like lecturing, and granted I was only lecturing it was a long ass day on a Monday and like another morning of the week. But to actually do that jump where it was like, shit, I can actually do this now, it's quite a liberating feeling, right?
Oh, it was the most liberating feeling ever, because I think hairdressing was incredible and it was great when I was younger, but it consumed my life. The hours that I worked were insane, absolutely insane, because it's commission led. So you're incentivized to work more hours. Yeah. So I worked nearly every evening. I worked Saturdays, Sundays, everything. And then to be able to give that have that freedom and give that up, it was, and not be a negative financial situation. It was amazing. But I literally then turned to drink on a serious level. So, you know, the wife was like, look, I know you're going to want to get out of your system. You've now got this freedom. You're going to want to go and party and have fun. And I just run with it in all the bad ways. You know, right. We had 2 kids at that point. You know, again, you can't get these timings right. I get my freedom. My wife just gets diagnosed with postnatal depression. And she thought I'll just get out of my system. It'd take a couple of months. And it didn't. And so I was accepting every party in the week up in London. And this is when I was, you know, being a full-time influencer. And those parties they're wild. I can imagine quite similar to the music industry.
Sure.
You know, you get riders, we get comp drinks to say nice things about restaurants and stuff like that. And I just ran with it, you know. So it turned in, so I was drinking 7 days a week, but then I was getting drunk 3 to 4 times a week.
Right.
You know, and the wife was very tolerant. She was allowing, you know, she'd get up with the kids, take them to school. I would just then wake up at some point in the morning. But then I didn't have that restriction. Like, what I realised, that hairdressing was my anchor. It was actually my sobriety anchor. It was what kept me from it. I felt like I'd been unplugged from the matrix and I was just free to roam. So I'd wake up and then I'd go to another event and get drunk. Or I was doing campaigns for alcohol companies, or, you know, I was pairing wine with food. So that consumption of alcohol just went absolutely through the roof. And I think now this slow burn of introducing alcohol through my 20s into my 30s, my tolerance for alcohol dramatically increased as well. So beforehand, you know, I could do a bottle of wine a night. I was then noticing that I was having to slow down my drinking. One of my favourite things to do was to put on some really good music and cook and drink. But I could smash a bottle of wine while cooking.
Yeah.
And then having to open up a second bottle to then sit down. Like, only thing was is that like, my wife doesn't really drink, so that kind of stopped. I think if she drank, I would be in. Yeah. I think we'll be looking at alcohol dependency rather than addiction to pattern forming.
Yeah, because you often hear, I think, with couples where one drinks a lot more than the other, but the other still drinks a bit, that there'd be a bottle of wine and one might have one glass whilst the other has four, and then they'll open another bottle, but the partner isn't necessarily noticing it because you're just sipping. So I guess, like you say, there was some accountability there that you were like, if you were just sat there mainlining wine, it would be quite obvious.
Yeah, and it was, like, so the first bottle in the kitchen, we'd even make lighthearted of it, because again, my tolerance was quite high. But then, like, I'm sat at dinner and I'm, 2 glasses of wine in for the second bottle, and I'm like beginning to slur or repeat myself. Not like drunk, but like you've got a stone cold sober wife, we're having dinner, and I'm 1.5 bottles of wine in.
Yeah.
But that did stop me. So it didn't. I didn't continue past that point because it just would have been weird. I wasn't getting that. I think at that point, isn't it, where you're drinking, you need that energy kick or that excuse to continue. Where it kind of did like fizzle that out. But then that was every day. And so that the alcohol units per week then was really, really high. And then what I found was that when I would go out every now and again with my friends and got really drunk, I was having to do like a bottle of spirits. But I went from like being fine to being very not fine.
Right.
And then that's when sort of like the blackouts would happen. And I would be on night, I'd just not remember the night, and it was a constant worry for my wife. She's dealing with her own mental health and she doesn't know if I'm going to, it was always this issue, I don't know how you're going to come in, and I think that's when like my mental health was beginning to get a little bit stressed, because again, it was maintaining this new thing. Because again, I can imagine it very same when you're a recording artist, which is like in the early stages, you don't know when your next paycheck is going to come. For me, it was like, yes, I've calculated this, it's doing well, but campaign's ended and I'm, oh my God, I haven't got another one,
Still a certain amount of ambiguity, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I know a few years down, there is stability and you have to run things differently. But I was institutionalized being employed. I was used to a monthly wage, and now all of a sudden I'm working on campaigns that might be 6 months and getting paid at the end of it. But then that had enough money to keep me going for 3 months. It's just a different way of managing your money. But I really struggled with that. I just being that local lad, used to being, employed, to this new weird I don't know what an influencer is, in this weird position. Yeah. So I started then, either coming home, I'd come home really happy, or I'd come back really drunk, or I'd want to have like, try and have like big, deeper meaning feels at 12 o'clock at night, when she's got the kids, asleep and stuff like that. And, the first time that she addressed it was we were on holiday, and I had my first abroad gig. So we ended up, so this is our first post-COVID family holiday.
Right.
So big, pressure. And I then landed this job. And this is what was happening, and what was putting a lot of strain on my relationship was that it was a lot of these like, oh my God, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. This doesn't happen. I haven't never done this before. And so halfway through my Portugal holiday, I had to fly to Barcelona to do some work, and left her with the kids. She's still really struggling at that point. And, we did have our father-in-law with us, but then when I flew back to Portugal, as like she was like, oh, as a reward, my dad's really looked after us. Why don't you take him out on the town? We then go and get absolutely blind drunk. I mean, like ridiculous. I can't remember getting home. He can't remember getting home. I'm phoning her like 4 a.m.
No.
Completely blind drunk. She doesn't know where I am. We're in a foreign country. I burst through the door, wake the kids up, try and have a big conversation about our relationship. Wrong time, really, really bad. And then I've given myself pretty much alcohol poisoning, and I'm a write-off for 2 days afterwards.
Jeez.
And so she's still having to look after the kids. Her support system of like my father-in-law and my brother-in-law, they're hungover. So she's got no support system. She's just now with hungover people that she's really angry at.
How old were the kids at this point?
So they would have been sort of 6. So was that last year? So yeah, so they're 5 and 3. So they're young.
So the oldest, I guess, would have kind of been aware that you were like hungover.
Yes, I think that there was, they even referred to it as like, oh, Daddy's been on his grown-up juice,
Right.
They would even play it down. My oldest, because I worked so much in hairdressing, she was kind of used to me just not being there. Like normally, like a lot of people that work hard have that weekends off, but for me, I was like working evenings and nights. So I've had to really, over the years of now giving that up, rebuild that relationship with my older daughter, 7, which I've got a great relationship. My younger daughter's a bit different, because I was there, it was when hairdressing was slowing down.
Sure.
I was in there a little bit more. But yeah, but this was a pattern that was just forming now of trying to have these really like not aggressive, but like these try and bring up all of our relationship problems when I'm absolutely blind drunk at bad times when my wife was really struggling with postnatal depression. You know, and there was later on that in the month was Easter. So my wife's side of mum's side of family, they like drink, you know, like to party as well. And we're around and we you know, we end up running out of the alcohol, like, you know, the wine and the beer, and you start going to the back of the cupboard cabinet and picking out all
the Kahlua out.
Oh god, yeah. So we're just doing all these shots, and this was the first time that my kids saw me drunk, like really, really drunk, and it scared them. You know, I wasn't being aggressive or anything like that, but I was irrational and I was saying
Probably just
weird
a different person, right?
Completely different person, and it really scared them. They didn't like it, and you know, my wife being, you know, mother bear she was like, no, this is not good. You know, you need to really start working. And it was my first time I kind of realised that alcohol is affecting me in a negative way.
Sure.
But I just carried on because I had the keys to the city. I had this new career, and I was being the selfishest I've ever been in my life.
I was going to ask about that, like, overarching thing of kind of starting a new career, which must be exciting for anyone. I know if I was to start one now, I know us doing this, I'm like, oh, a new thing, exciting. But also in a world that you've never been in, where drinking is encouraged, and you're maybe around people that aren't necessarily connecting. So you're kind of going to these events and having to, like, be a version of yourself, and they're being a version of themselves, and alcohol might be the thing that links. Like,
definitely,
that culture must be quite overwhelming at times.
Yeah, because, you know, you've seen backstage, you know, and you might get this with artists as well, like that you have a stage presence, and the stage presence and as influencer presence is you're bubbly and energetic and over the top, but inside you're still an awkward human, you know, at an event full of strangers, or your only common association is the industry that you work in, you know, like, and it was, you know, you were encouraged to drink heavily. And, you know, even now when I go to places and I don't drink, like, they kind of look at you like, oh, like, we want you to promote our wine list, but you're not going to because you don't drink, you know. It's still that stigma comes from that, you know. And, I just think that alcohol level that you get at, and it's acceptable to get drunk. Like, in a way, what I was finding that industry stuff, yes, I was getting wasted, but I wasn't getting, like, out of control because, again, you're in the spotlight. So you've got to have a degree of decorum.
A sweet spot, I guess.
It's a sweet spot, you know. Like, they encourage, like, you do shots, but you don't say anything out of place because you're in the public eye. You know, there's always, what I've realised as well now from being sober at these events, there's always sober people, and there's always people working. So we might be the talent, but people are keeping an eye on you, you know, and you can be destroyed in an industry or blacklisted very, very quickly.
In a heartbeat.
Yeah, so you have to go and be conscientious. But what I was finding is it was my damage in drinking, my negative drinking was with close friends or family, where I didn't have to put that show on.
Right.
And that's when I would be drinking, like, serious amounts. But my health then, by this point, started to really be affected. So my weight gain was astronomical. It was the biggest I've ever been. My acid reflux and my heartburn was on a different level because the amount of wine I was drinking. So yeah, probably maybe 7 bottles of wine, 8 bottles of wine a week, you know. I was on, like, 12 Rennies. I was popping Rennie like you would chewing gum. I was on, like, other, you know, anti-reflux medicine just to combat it. So my life was literally combating hangovers to then drink more. Yeah. And that was just that constant, you know, I'd have hangover kits, or when I was, you know, I'd work out what I'd need to do, or, you know, I was looking into, like, you know, you could get these, like, post or, like, pre-hangover remedies and all that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to drink more, and I wanted to try and, like, medicate myself to not have bad hangovers so I can continue the party. And, you know, my family life is crumbling around me, you know, and but I'm still getting these opportunities and still taking them, you know. And I think the first time I realised that there was life outside of drinking was actually on a job in Turkey. I had my first, and this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I got to work with the Michelin Guide out in Turkey.
Amazing.
And launched their star system in Istanbul.
Wow.
And it was it was the World Press. I was part of the World Press. And it was incredible. A memory that I've always going to have. But there's a guy on there, Harry, like, Hill Chef, and he wasn't drinking. And I was perplexed why he wasn't. And he was just sort of like, yeah, man, I'm just taking a bit of time out drinking. And I was like, yeah, but you're on this, like, amazing all-expense-paid trip. Why aren't you
getting recos?
Why aren't you getting reco? And there's me, like, you know, dealing with my hangovers and, you know, really struggling, you know, and a big regret. Like, we went to this Michelin star restaurant for lunch, and I was trying not to throw up. you know, so I'm ruining these occasions. And, you know, and he's getting up and using a 5-star gym and going for spas. And he just looked just quietly like confident, or just he was just happy with himself, which now I know what that feels like being sober, you know. But that was the first time, because I kept questioning him, and very similar to a lot of people have questioned me, you know, literally pronging, you know, why are you not drinking? And I think it's more like a mirror, and I know you've talked about this a lot with a lot of your guests, which is like, it holds a mirror up to the people that are drinking, doesn't it? And
probably planted a seed, I suppose, as well.
Definitely, and that's why I can still remember it now, because it's a very small detail.
Yeah.
But it was like, okay, so you can do it sober. You can be in this industry and do it sober. And so that sort of done the seed. But then I've done a couple more tours working with the Turkish government, and again, I was out. I wasn't there for my family, and you know, kept getting drunk, kept you know, appallingly health issues, and then it came to that frightful night, the last ever time I drunk, you know, and that's where I just took it way too far, you know. It was so that would have been the 30th of December last year. So
right.
I'm 11 months sober, and that was, you know, I've got a friend in you know, a similar industry, and he is trying to, I wouldn't say the problems that I had, but he's trying to have a better relationship with alcohol as well.
Sure.
So this time we're trying to like pretending, we're like, okay, cool, well, we won't drink, or we go for a big walk, and then we'll reward ourselves with a drink at the end. So yeah, we went for a big walk. We ended up in a local place called the Royal Standard. And
beautiful pub.
Yeah, beautiful pub.
Yeah.
And that's what we thought. So instead of us getting wrecked in local pubs, we would then go to nice places to try and justify it. And we start with a few pints, and then the wine comes out, you know, and then we've started a pub crawl. Bearing in mind, it's like 2-3 in the afternoon. Met up with another friend, and now we're rolling, literally physically rolling, can't even walk through Beaconsfield, hammering cocktails in another local place, you know, 40 quid rounds, just drinking them. And then I end up in a local club ordering a tray of shots. You can imagine what one I ended up in. Yeah. But I thought it was like nighttime. It's like 6 o'clock in the evening.
Right.
And then I've hammered, you know, like we all then smashed 20 shots. Next thing you know, it's my first ever blackout while I'm still like conscious.
Right.
So next thing you know, I'm now walking down a street on my own in a really bad emotional state. I don't know where my friends are, and I don't know what's happened. And it's my first like complete memory loss being out. So then I found my wife, and she was having none of it, because I was doing this all the time.
Right.
Trying to trauma dump on her, phone her, you know, and she just thought, oh, Ollie, just get home, it's fine, you know. And then I try and work through my phone book, and like no one was picking up or anything like that. And this was the time then I found my parents, and I spoke to my dad. And I think because my dad's, you know, he doesn't drink now, but he was a heavy drinker, and he had health implications, and he couldn't drink anymore. He knew that conversation I was having with him, because all I'd done was phoning him to see, like, you know, asking how he was, but he knew that it was something that was doing. And it was probably the deepest and darkest place I'd been. You know, I wasn't going to do anything silly, but I was probably the closest to not really not understanding who I was, where I was, just in a very dark place. But he'd done, I think, understanding how to deal with drunk people. He was like, hey, Ollie, why don't I come pick you up and get a burger? You know, and he did. He managed to find me. He managed to finally coax up where I was, and I got in a car and just completely broke down. You know, I just trauma dumped everything that was going on in my life. You know, because it was, you know, the stress of having children, the stress of a new career, relationship issues, all those things was just such. It's obviously playing on my mind so much. I hadn't discussed them at all, and I was just drinking my problems away. And you know, and then, you know, he took me to, you know, the service station. You know, second best in Europe.
The best in Europe.
Is it the best in Europe?
To me.
Yeah, it is good. And, you know, and he just talked me through it. And I think for me then, it was then when I was like, right, I need to make changes. And what happened was two of my other friends as well. We still to this day can't remember what we discussed, but they both had breakdowns, ended up in different areas crying. And all three of us cannot remember what that subject matter was. And I don't think we want to revisit it, because I think that must have been very traumatic, whatever that was. And that was the time where I decided enough's enough, and no more alcohol.
And here you are today.
And here I am today.
11 months in. Well, congratulations, man, because I think that's a really brave story to share, and obviously one that, you know, with kids and wife and everything that's gone on and changing career, sounds like you hadn't really talked about anything. And I think a lot of men in particular do that thing where you just hold it in and you don't discuss
you bury it, don't you?
You bury
so fair fucking play for getting to that point, because it's, you know, something we're trying to really advocate on this podcast is just talking, and hopefully people don't get to the level of stress that maybe you did. But obviously there was a point that you realised and were able to communicate to your dad, and glad to have you here chatting it through.
Yeah, it's really good, man. What was your process? So that was the 30th of December last year. What was your process of like recovery? Did you just go, well, I need to sort this out, that's enough? Or did you go for any like 12 step or like?
No, like I'm pretty good. I'm quite determined. If I want to do something, like I quit smoking, boom, done, you know. And for me it was, I've always really struggled with middle ground. I just can't find it. And I think me spending last year drinking heavily, knowing that it was a problem, trying to, you know, find that middle ground of becoming that like social drinker.
Yeah.
I just knew it wasn't. And I knew also I was on my last legs with my wife. Like I really was like very, very close to divorce. And she said, you stopping drinking has saved our marriage, you know? And, you know, for me then it was just sort of like, I just knew that choice then. I've had the party and it was time to end that party. And, so I, you know, done the, you know, same, joined the gym, started work. You know, I think I really like January. I know everyone gets really like a bit doom and gloom on January, but for me, I like the beginnings of things. I like Mondays, you know, if you start well, you'll end up, you know, keeping that focus. And that, you know, I'm always worried about obviously online and creating content, but I think in January as well, people naturally want to eat a little bit healthier. So it was a good time for me to start playing around with some healthier dishes, understanding nutrition. And I had an audience that also helped me. So I didn't know much about nutrition or diets and all those sorts of things. So I put it out to my followers. And the amount of information I got back and helpfulness, it was great. Understanding macros, understanding calorie count, in all of these things. And I joined gym, and now gym is my therapy.
Nice.
You know, I don't like not going to the gym now. You know, it's something that I really, really enjoy, and it's definitely connected to my positive mental health now. And so I kept it quiet. I didn't want, because again, like with having an online persona and a large following, you put something out, you either are accountable for it, and I didn't know where it was going to go. I just knew that at that time I just didn't want to drink or should drink. And it just kept rolling, you know. Like, did I plan? It was very similar to how I quit smoking. I didn't say I was never going to quit smoke, I'd never smoke again. You know, I just stopped smoking. And same with alcohol. It was just sort of like, look, I'm just not going to drink. And let's just see how it goes. Nice. And, you know, now it's definitely, I'm never going to drink again. But like, it's, you know, that's how it happens. And, you know, January's fine because a lot of people don't drink in January. It was when the social calendar started opening back up again, was when it was my first sort of like little struggles. And like the support structure sort of wobbled a little bit, because again, like we have me and Jamie share quite a rowdy social group.
Yeah,
you know, and you know, there's a lot of people that have gone sober, and there's a lot of people that haven't.
Sure.
You know, so my first hard experience was my first lads holiday. You know, and they weren't as supportive. And sorry, lads, if you guys are listening, but you know, it was a hard one. You know, it was. I didn't tell them I wasn't drinking, and we got to the airport. And I went, hey guys, look, I'm off the booze. I had a rough year, you know, I've got some issues and I'm not going to drink. And the first thing was like, yeah, but you're on holiday. You know, and the whole, you know, 4 or 5 days was pretty much trying to get me to drink. You know, and it was quite sad actually, because these were quite close friends.
Yeah, that's quite tough. How long in were you to not drinking at this point?
Well, that was February.
Oh shit, so pretty fresh.
Yeah.
So that is a big test.
Yeah. But I was confident. I was reaping the benefits. Like, my marriage was recovering, my relationship with my children was recovering, and my priorities had realigned.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, I was in a really comfortable, confident position, and also I was really enjoying the holiday. Like, for me, like, what better? Like, snowboard holidays, like, great thing to be sober for. You get up early, and I was like going to us, guys, if you want to go and have mental nights out, cool. I'll get up and go on a hike and do some cooking in the woods or whatever. You know, like, I'm not affecting your life. Like, I am here. We've all got our own rooms. We're not even sharing. Like, this is the time that I'm not going to affect it, you know. And it was fine. But I'd been that person.
Yeah.
I'd been that person. I had a friend a few years ago that just done a year not drinking. And every weekend I tried to get him to drink. You know, I had a friend that couldn't drink because he was on call every other weekend. And I would just try and corrupt him you know.
Mate, I know, and I feel bad for that because I remember there was, you know, a guy I know called Jordan who went sober, and he was quite young, and he was actually like a really big fan of my band. And I remember being out once in town, and he was like, "Oh, I don't drink anymore," and I literally couldn't fucking compute that. And I was like sort of mid-20s, and he must have been early 20s. And yeah, I remember being like, "Mate, get fucked." I was like, "Get some shots." I'm like, and I feel fucking terrible now for like being that guy. But it was realistically just because I couldn't compute a life without alcohol myself.
Yeah.
That I was like, that's mental. But now, like you say, it's like you probably look back and thought, fuck, I wish I didn't do that.
Oh yeah, you know, big regrets and stuff like that. What has been interesting though, the hospitality industry been very, very understanding.
That's great.
I think because it's rife, alcoholism, drug abuse is rife. I've even, you know, had some sort of big meetups where I might have got a bit sessiony at the end of these big meetups, and those guys have been so cool. Like they didn't even mention that I wasn't drinking. I actually stayed longer because it wasn't a thing, me not drinking, and because they're probably a little bit more used to doing quite a lot of stuff, that they didn't chat me ear off or trauma dump or anything like those types of things, you know. And it was fine. They just took me as me, and we're having normal conversations. And hospitality is really bad place for alcohol abuse, and I think it is getting addressed. There's some really good charities and stuff out there, but it needs to be discussed more. And I've got even like kitchen wine salted, so chefs don't drink it, you know, like, yeah. So
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
You
not
had
even
to?
something I thought. Sorry,
Sorry.
that was not even something I thought about.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing of wine there.
Yeah.
Just the access.
Have you had to like pivot your business at all?
Yes, I think so. So a lot of my work was from alcohol brands, and so I've had to turn a lot of work down. So quite a loss, and I haven't sort of like hasn't like swung the other way. So I haven't necessarily gained a load of like non-alcoholic brands, because I set up a rule to myself that I won't promote alcohol anymore on my accounts. Because I just think it's a belief, it's a moral compass that I've got. And
Fair play though, man.
Yeah,
That's an
play.
amazing thing and stance to take, I think.
I think so. I think that I think alcohol advertising in general is quite restrictive anyway on socials, and you really can't be encouraging people to drink naturally from advertisement. But I think it's not something that I do, and I think it would be wrong for me to and you know, from then I start slowly speaking about my sobriety online, not heavily, but you know, and the amounts of DMs that I got from people struggling with alcoholism or questioning, was it sober curiosity? I was like, wow, you know, I really cannot be advertising it, because there is people on the brink here really struggling, and they're still in a point of in their head, and they haven't even spoken about it. And you know, you could do like an anonymous thing on your stories where you can ask questions and stuff like that. So I was speaking to people anonymously, and it's scary. The peer pressure from their friends and the FOMO of missing out on things is hard. And I know you had it when you started, when you know, you'd get a lot of DMs and stuff, and you're like, how do I handle this? You know, it's quite serious. And you could deal with some people that are like, you know, more surface level, but when people start talking about the deeper stuff, it's like, you know, that's why you got a sober psychotherapist involved.
Yeah, and we'll always try and reply to everyone where we can, if it's like tips or hints, or we'll send a few voice notes here and there if it's like, you know, I'm thinking about going on holiday for the first time, how do I deal with it? But yeah, there are some people that we just have to divert to either charity or the NHS, because we had another guest on recently that was saying, like, you know, going cold turkey if you're in full physical dependency can kill you.
So the seizures and stuff you have. So but yeah, I guess what you're saying is almost like within your industry, I suppose if you can become like a, you know, a bit of a beacon for some people that might be going through a rough time and that. So yeah, it's very kudos to you for, like, you know, turning down the alcohol brands. And you know, I think we do have quite a few non-alcohol brands listening in, so you know where to go, guys.
Yeah, you know where to go, guys.
So that's cool. But yeah, I mean, so I think let's just talk about the positives for a minute. You know, relationship at home better than ever, kids.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm in the now. You know, I'm present. I'm not combating hangovers. I'm not you know, trying to work out. Alcohol was just controlling the narrative in my life so much. And what's been really nice is I've had so many penny drop moments across this year of just sort of like, and I call them like little wins, where you're just like, oh yeah, like every year I go and stay in an Airbnb with some family and stuff like that. And I remember last year, like, stressing of like, okay, right, so I need the beers, but then I'm gonna need the wine. But what if we get a little bit drunk and I'm gonna need to bring some spirits and maybe some fun drinks? And why are you having this conversation? That's crazy. You shouldn't be thinking that amount. Or like, oh, I need to get the train beers in, but then am I gonna get to, you know, the train shop on the way home to get the last beers to drink on the way home? And like, that's really controlling the narrative. And like, also, I wasn't visiting areas if the taxis were really expensive. So like, there's a whole area of like Buckinghamshire that I wouldn't go to because they didn't have like public transport, because I'd always want to drink.
Now you can drive.
And now I can drive, you know, and those types of things. And, you know, I've done like you know, I've really tested myself this year. So I've done a, you know, festival sober.
Nice.
Where we bumped into each other. Download.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And what I realised, all my anxiety around going to Download, even before I started drinking, was all drink related.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, how am I going to handle 5 days hungover? How much alcohol am I going to have to bring in? How much money am I going to have to spend? And you just remove alcohol from that narrative. I've got no problems.
That's way better.
Yeah, it's literally like a few nice bits of food.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, it was. And like, it was, you know, the campsite was a bit wild. And I think you do miss, you can't really relate to those types of things. I think there's a level of like, you know, you could go out, you can have some fun, you could be around drunk people, but there's that point. I think after midnight, it does get a little bit challenging.
Yeah, when
you
people
know?
are screaming Alan across the
campsite.
campsite.
Yeah, the repetition and the wildness. But then how I looked at it was, you know, I think we have it with the kids called like making happy choices. So I was like, look, I'm just going to go to sleep. You know, so rather than trying to stay up and try and get on board on this environment that I'm not going to, put my earbuds in, my little sleep mask on, and got 7 hours sleep.
Yeah.
Woke up refreshed, saw the bands that I wanted to see, and you know, stay hydrated because they had Liquid Death sponsoring it, which is like, for me, like, I've been wanting to try that. I know it's only water, but I really like sparkling water, and they had it. And it's the first time in the UK, and you know, their marketing and stuff is amazing in America, and that just kept going. And like, I actually came back more refreshed and rested from Download because I slept well, I'd hydrated, I'd caught the sun, and saw some amazing bands. You know. Yeah.
Got that dopamine hit.
In a positive way. So yeah, so like, and all of that, and like from industry stuff now, yes, a little bit challenging sometimes. You know, when they want you to advertise, you know, flights of wine, etc. But no, you just make it clear. I feature a lot of Middle Eastern food, and so naturally those types of restaurants won't really have alcohol served, or it's not a strong narrative. So that's been absolutely fine, and all I'm seeing is benefits. You know, like, I'm definitely the evangelical euphoric thing is definitely past. You know, I'm now in that middle ground. You know, you don't get those high highs, you don't get those low lows. I'm kind of at that point now, and it's hard. You know, you are raw dogging your problems and emotions. You know, but I think that you need to. You know, I think rather than suppressing them or, you know, burying your head in the sand, I think actually having that focus and that clarity and that clear head helps you at least formulate a plan and a strategy on how to work towards your goals and combat your problems.
That's great.
Yeah, fully agree. You give me the look. It's time.
I think it is.
For the big three.
Big three.
I'm nervous.
We need some kind of like the big three.
The big three.
Music. I'm going to take the first two.
No.
Yeah, because I feel like you've made it a thing now that I don't care about you having the last question, and that's been, you know what I'm like, Tom. I'm sensitive.
All right.
I've been laying in bed thinking like Tom thinks that I just take them. I'm gonna fuck him up though.
I appreciate it,
but it's fine. So for our listeners on a journey of sobriety, what is the single best piece of advice you could give?
So what personally worked for me is to disassociate any drink with any occasion. So we anchor all of these things that you got to drink. You know, champagne at New Year's, or, you know, airport beers, or, you know, red wine with red meat and stuff like that. If you just, for me, what worked, you know, say from my own personal experience, is just to go, do you know what, like, am I thirsty? Or, you know, no, I don't need a drink, you know, or make a tea, just not, and even not non-alcoholic ones, just disassociate that and realize that you create all these little habits and these links that are completely unnecessary, and they really weigh you down when you want to make changes. So if you just disassociate that, then you have the freedom to make those choices. And that's the advice that I would give.
That's banging advice, actually.
Really
very
good.
Unique. No one else has given us that advice. For you, what has been the single best thing about going sober?
I briefly talked about small wins and happy choices. I think that by being so sober, you have focus. Like, I do a lot of work in London, and when I used to drink, it would be like you're really running for that last train. Now I'm like, oh, the last fast train's at 9:30. I'm going to get on that, and then I'm on a 20-minute ride home rather than a 45-minute ride home. You know, tapping out of events once you know that it's reached its, fever pitch. Those small little wins, the little money savings, those types of things has been what's great. Having that focus and that clarity to make happy choices.
Amazing. I love that. And I fully relate to that train situation. There's 2 trains going back to Wickham on Beaconsfield that if you miss like the 22:11 or something, there's not another one for like 45 minutes or wherever I go out, and make sure that I'm getting that last fast
I will be there.
Yeah, exactly. Go on.
So the final third. So we'd like you to write a letter to drinking/drunk Ollie from now 11 months in sober Ollie, starting with Dear Ollie.
Dear Ollie, you've just got to Marylebone. You've justified to your wife that you need to do this event. She's at home and she's struggling. Don't drink. You probably shouldn't have done this event in the first place, but go and do it. Leave early, go home, be with your family, support your wife, love your kids, and wake up feeling refreshed. That'd be my note.
Boom.
Yeah, nice,
Love
man. That's really
man.
good.
That was beautiful.
Really good.
Man, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, mate. That's really, really insightful.
We've been flirting with this idea of getting you on for a while, and it's
Yeah.
perfect guest, and it's nice to have a friend on who we've been on very different, but I culturally know the anchor points that you were coming from, and I very much feel them as well. So yeah, mate, thank you so much. You've been amazing.